Welcome to the second of our webinar series on reducing uncertainties and raising awareness of clean fuels. We are pleased to present today's webinar focused on long-haul freight with Dan Wicklum, Nicholas Roberts, Ian Thomson, Bruce Winchester, and Johanne Whitmore. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the work we do spans across many First Nations. We acknowledge the space our organization's headquarters includes the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. The lands are also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta. We share these acknowledgements in the spirit of truth, justice, and reconciliation. Our webinar series looks at alternative fuels for different vehicle classes and asks panelists with real-world experience their perspective on the transition and how they perceive these challenges and opportunities. There are multiple options out there for operators, and we want to bring some clarity into this space. We will open the webinar by having the panelists respond to our key question, followed by some moderator questions. We will then open the floor to the audience for further questions. Please make sure to submit all questions for the panelists in the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen, and also indicate whether you would like to direct this question to all the panelists or to a specific panelist. If you encounter any technical difficulties, please don't hesitate to send a message in the chat. One of our team members will be available to help. Lastly, please be aware that this webinar is being recorded for future reference. There will be a post-webinar survey that will be prompted after the webinar and sent out again tomorrow. Please let us have your thoughts. I'm pleased to present our panelists for today's webinar. First, we have Dan Wicklum, the CEO of Transition Accelerator, a pan-Canadian charity that works with groups across the country to solve business and social challenges while building in net zero emission solutions. Ian Thomson is the president of Advanced Biofuels Canada, the national voice for producers, distributors, and technology developers of advanced biofuels and renewable synthetic fuels. Bruce Winchester has been the executive director of the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance since 2015. The CNGVA has a mandate to support Canadian medium and heavy-duty fleets in attaining cost-effective emissions reductions through the use of gaseous fuels. Nick Roberts is a principal consultant at CPCS. Nick has worked with clients across Canada, including government ministries, municipalities, and transit authorities on the business initiatives and policy decisions with a focus on sustainability. Most recently, he collaborated with leading researchers at HCE Montreal to understand pathways for the decarbonization of long-haul trucking. Last but not least, we have Johanne Whitmore, who is the senior researcher and the chair in energy sector management at HEC Montreal. Her research focuses on the efficiency of measures to achieve the energy transition and decarbonization of economies. Recently, she co-authored a study of net zero Class 8 trucks on the highway corridor between Quebec City and Windsor. So I'd like to begin by asking our panelists the key question for the webinar. We know that ECCC is in consultations regarding the implementation for a sales mandate for zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles. But this mandate will only be required where feasible. We'd like to ask our panelists whether they think that any long-haul truck categories where a sales mandate might be feasible, what it would look like, and what is the role of alternative fuels for long-haul trucks in the short and long term. Dan, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thanks very much. Really appreciate Pembina asking the Transition Accelerator to be part of this panel. I happen to be on Treaty 7 land just west of downtown Calgary. I actually find the question quite interesting because I don't think they're really lend themselves to yes-no answers or to definitives. This is tricky space, evolving very quickly. So let me answer it in this way. Is there any place where we could have zero-emission vehicle mandates? Well, of course, it depends what the mandates are in terms of proportion of mandate and the timing of the mandate. But I think what's really important is it's not really about what's happening now. Are mandates feasible right now? That's not the question. Really, the question is like, will the economics, the technology, and the leadership be available to service a mandate at some point in the future? So really, it causes you to inspect deeply how transitions happen. At the Transition Accelerator, when we launched the organization about 4 years ago, now we're 50 people, sort of coast to coast, where we help governments, industry, academia put in transition pathways, just like the ones to heavy zero emission vehicles, we took a very deep look at how transitions happen. And what happens is they go very, very slowly, often for years or even decades. And then something happens. There's an inflection point, and that's often a regulation. It could be a switch in leadership. And then the transition happens almost in a vertical sense if you're talking about technology implementation. And then the last little bit of the transition happens quite slowly. So these very, very predictable S curves happen. And when we took a look at about the top 50 transitions that happened technologically over the last century, again, this curve is unmistakable. And when we took a look at when that transition happens, the inflection point from slow to fast, there's almost always a government intervention, or at least many times there is as well. So the concept of the mandate itself is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the governments are strong in their messaging to say, we are going to put a mandate in place, then the system gets ready. And I think it's very instructive to take a look at light-duty vehicles. I mean, the concept of a ZEV mandate for light-duty vehicles has been around for 20 years. And the industry has always found it difficult to embrace it. Why would they not? They're making quite good profits using the existing system, supply chains, value chains. So it's governments that basically are forcing this. And I would say even up until 5 years ago, the sector said, like, we can't do this. Well, now they're doing it because the mandates are real. So the question of, like, are we ready is really around the question, like, will we be ready? And that's really a government, a regulation issue. But I think the private sector does have a strong role to play, and that is helping to develop options. And that's what I think we're going to get into in the rest of the panel here is, like, what really is the relative merits of those options. But to answer the question, are we ready? Well, the answer is we could be ready if we all lean into it, and that we have a perfect example in light duty vehicles.
Thank you. Ian?
Hi, Ian Thomson. Thanks again to Pembina and to Hanju and to Adam and gang for convening the conversation. So as noted in the tee-up, our industry association includes companies that produce the technology for, project developers for, and biorefinery operators of advanced biofuels and increasingly renewable synthetic fuels, about 36 billion liters of capacity worldwide. So virtually any kind of fuel made from any kind of feedstock for any kind of technology. Couple of thoughts, three off the top. To the question, could a mandate work? Yes, it could, but it wouldn't be a technology mandate. It would be a performance standard, like a low carbon fuel standard. You could mandate the use of a low carbon energy, and you would, I think, arguably achieve more directly the outcome you're looking for, which is GHG emission reductions. You're not actually looking for an outcome of zero emission vehicles. You're doing that as a means toward an end. And so, that I think would be a preferable approach. Canada is not the EU. Canada is not California. We don't want to put all of our eggs in a fuel cell electric vehicle or a battery electric Class 8. Obviously, a lot of challenges there. I think you also want to be really careful not to be banning the use of effectively banning the use of motive technologies that can have incredibly low carbon intensities. And Bruce will probably talk to some of what's going on in the gaseous space. So I think that the European Parliament on November 21st includes CO2 neutral fuels in their definition for acceptable fuels for addressing heavy duty emissions, what we would call Class 8, and they included advanced biofuels and renewable synthetics. So I think the Europeans are clearly kind of ahead of this and have been at this conversation for longer. And I would argue, I don't think many Canadians would disagree that Canada is a fundamentally more challenging platform than California is to decarbonize in heavy duty, where, by the way, 60% of the distillate pool is already renewable content. And certainly not as challenging as the EU. And I would also, just on kind of two other points, ICE compatible fuels are going to be critical going forward. The concern is often expressed that they're fine, but you can't scale them. And that really, and I get that argument when it comes to crops. When you're dealing with renewable synthetics, you're synthesizing fuel and you open up a vast bucket of biomass. We burn 50,000 tons of slash at landings in BC every year, we burn, well, there's huge buckets of residues and waste biomass. And then when you get into synthesizing waste gaseous streams, et cetera, you have a whole lot of additional feedstocks. I am familiar with a number of technologies for producing fully compatible in infrastructure and vehicles feedstock fuels that are, minus 40 grams on a GHG basis. The third point that I think is really critical if we're going to have a real world conversation about this is, I'm in my sort of 20th year of lobbying and doing frontline policy work, and increasingly you have to talk about the economics. When I meet with people in Ottawa, it's very clear we're in austerity mode. Going forward, the provinces are going to be tight as public spending shifts towards adaptation and away from mitigation. $1 billion spent on fighting fires in BC this year alone. I think we have to look and ask the question, where's the money going to come from? And I talked with my colleagues and was on the phone with one a couple of days ago from the trucking sector. And 36,000 Class 8 tractors sold every year in Canada. If the delta between a fuel cell emission vehicle, Class 8, and a internal combustion one is about $1 million Canadian, if you had to turn every one of those over every year to be $38 billion, let's say prices cut in half, you're at 14, prices cut in third, you're at $7 billion a year to turn over, and toward the end, you're going to be spending a lot of money. I'm just not aware of any fleets other than large kind of ESG fleets that really speak only to a small number of the relative regs on the road. Those monies aren't there. So I think we have to address that. I think we have to have a real conversation about who's going to pay for this. You can't just make automotive manufacturers pay for it. It's a great road to bankruptcy. There's got to be an answer about how do we cover the costs of these. And things I love about the fuels that our members produce, you can buy renewable diesel off the rack today in Montreal from Valero at the same price as number one diesel. That's for 100% renewable diesel. So the economics are highly favorable. They can scale with renewables, synthetics, and we don't have to get into this discussion about where are the billions and billions and billions from the public purse going to come from. So just some initial thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ian. Seems like the implicit message there is that a sales mandate not that feasible for long haul, but get further into that. Let's turn to Nick first, and we'll try to figure out what's everything's okay.
Yep. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Hongyu. And thanks again to Pembina Institute for having me on this panel today. It's great. There's a lot of bright minds from industry here and in academia as well. So I'm glad to hear everyone's thoughts today. I think I agree. My perspectives are relatively in line with some of the points others have made. Dan saying we're in the early stages and these transitions kind of happen slowly, and then there's an inflection point where one of the home run and silver bullet technologies tend to emerge. I think it's important to note that the long haul trucking is not necessarily a homogeneous category. There's lots of different types of long haul trucking subsegments to the market by ownership, like if it's large fleet operators or owner operator fleets, the types of commodities that they're moving. Some are very heavy goods, some are more lighter goods like groceries and consumer goods, and then also the routes that they're doing. So I think understanding that there's not really a uniform type of long haul trucking, that there definitely could be an opportunity for like a mix of solutions. And I think it would be maybe a bit too early to have a sales mandate dictate the direction and potentially limit technology innovation and some of these alternative fuels or other technologies that could play a role in the short term as well, and also help in the long term with some of those subsegments that are really challenging to decarbonize. I think if you look at some of the other jurisdictions, it's not necessarily long haul trucking, but in Class 8 trucking segments, you have like drayage trucking, which is basically the shunting of container traffic from ports and intermodal terminals to warehousing. So those are relatively shorter hauls that the trucks travel and a bit more definition around their day-to-day operations. I think some activity like that could lend itself well to a battery electric type of solution, a bit easier. But then there's others where you have for hire trucking, where if you have your truck gets hired to go deliver a load somewhere and you're optimizing the use of that truck and you want to pick up another load to return back, there's more variability in that day-to-day type of use of the truck, which could make it more challenging to pin down a technology option. So that all to say, I think that there's a lot to study. It's definitely very complex, and I think you want to keep as many useful options open as possible now until we kind of study and learn them a little bit more, and then see over the medium and long term how we could tackle this decarbonization effort. So thanks. Hangyu, back to you.
Thank you. Finally, we have Johanne.
Thanks again to Pembina for the invitation. I guess as a university, we tend to have the possibility of being much more detached, independent, and kind of have a larger perspective of issues. And so in terms of a mandate, it only will work to the extent that we understand the systems and how it's not just about, if it financially is going to work, because that's very important. And also, like some others have said, it's not so much the technology focus that's important, but the performance, because what we want is to meet the goal, which is to decarbonize. But on the other hand, we need to understand what is driving the system and how does the biofuels compare with the actual system currently, which works with regular fossil fuel. And it's going to be very different for many reasons. We tend to look at the potentials of different fuels just from, we do the usual or theoretical, then we go to a technical potential evaluation, and then we do a techno-economic potential. And that's what, for instance, me and Nick Roberts with CPCS, we did. We joined our forces and we looked at what was the potential of four different decarbonizing options on the corridor between Quebec City and Windsor. So we looked at hydrogen, green hydrogen, renewable natural gas. Then we looked at electrification and catenary trucks. And what we see is that when you look at them from a broader perspective, they can work if you just work in a sort of a universe where you don't take into consideration the maximum commercializing potential. And that's where actually a lot of the technologies tend to not pan out, because what you need to understand is that, for biofuels, there's a real issue about supply. It's not just the cost, but it's also where is it going to come from? And then there's a real issue about competition between usage of these fuels, because everybody wants some. I work with the maritime industry, they want some. I work with the aviation, they want some. And then you have this segment of long-haul transportation, and this is not even talking about industry that is going to need also a lot of alternative fuels. So if we want a realistic approach, we need to think, I think, for these mandates in terms of the different usage, and then to understand what are the conditions that are going to be needed. And as I think that Nick was saying, it might be to look at segments, because not all the different types of heavy trucks are going to need the same type of fuel or decarbonizing option to reach those goals. And then the other option is we tend to always focus on fuel and technology, but when you look at a systems approach, you have to also look at what are you going to be modifying in order to reduce the demand at the starting point, and then possibly transfer actually, so when you're moving goods, transfer goods by the most efficient transportation means, so that can be better rail, better maritime. And then only at the end, when you sort of optimize your system, then it makes sense to look at the different decarbonizing options, because then you will need lesser of them because they're going to be more expensive than regular fuels. And then you can start thinking how to best use in a more target fashion those fuels. We tend to kind of skip the two first, so reduction and transfer of goods, to make sure that we have the least need for fuels at the end to replace with these new expensive biofuels or hydrogen. So, that's the thing that I think that the mandate will only work if we consider that. And then if we start in a sort of more logical way to look where the greatest flow of Class 8, Class 7 trucks are going. So you can work in terms of corridors, and that's, for instance, what they're doing in Europe. It's not like kind of a one bullet solution for everything. You look at the corridors and the applications that are going to make the most sense for these fuels, as opposed to thinking that they're going to replace the current fuels without having to change any of the current business models. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. So I think there's some, and again, I'll say that please ask your questions in the Q&A portion of the text box. If you have any questions, we welcome them, open participation to the floor. But I want to further ask the panelists, I think we've heard some conversations there about supply, about availability today, and about kind of the comparison of technologies. And my understanding is that one of the so-called selling points of biofuels and renewable natural gas is that they're available today, available now, unlike hydrogen or battery electric, for long haul at least, where it's something that's going to, it's not something that's really available now. So how would you assess the viability, availability today in the next 5 years versus in the next 10 to 15 years, for example, and considering also whether there's a difference between production of sustainable versions of those fuels versus more current production, which is a bit more unsustainable, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, that's great. You've bundled a couple of questions into that, Hanju. Very good. I think the main benefits, as you noted, are and there are two kinds of biofuels. There are some that are not fully fungible. You can include them up to a certain percentage point. Biodiesel is widely used at 20%. In the US, in Canada, it's in most diesel at 5%. The synthetic and renewable hydrocarbon fuels can be used at 100%. So right now, the city of Vancouver is running all of its heavy-duty equipment on 100% renewable diesel. The buses in Vancouver are just making that transfer. There are hundreds of fleets in the US that are running. So it's fully fungible, no cost needed on infrastructure, no cost needed on a vehicle. It's diesel fuel for all intents and purposes. The modeling that we and others have done, particularly on the ag sector, show that we have, with crush capacity and the capacity to produce these fuels from projects like the Imperial Oil Refinery or Brea Renewables or our Bios or et cetera, we have until 2030 enough capacity in Canada from additional crush on oil seeds to meet the demands of the clean fuel reg. During that time, we will start to see coming into commercial applications some of the renewable synthetic fuels that I referred to, and those are then tapping a whole different class of feedstocks. They would be non-crops, they would be residual forestry waste, they would be railway ties, telephone poles. And then you can also synthesize CO2 with the Fischer-Tropsch to make into a nice diesel fuel. So everybody can see that the opportunity to keep growing in more conventional biofuels is going to be capped by what you can pull off the ag sector. And everybody's aware you can't just keep going back to that same bucket. That's incenting a lot of the innovation. And we've had this underway now for a decade. We've seen it coming. So that's really where I'm looking to, not being constrained by the production of today. It's there's a lot of innovation happening in this space in much the same way that in the electrification space, there's challenges upstream and critical minerals, et cetera, and we have a belief that those can be solved. Arguably, the renewable synthetics are considerably further ahead. The supply chains are all well established.
Would anyone like to speak further to that, Dan?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. Again, I think often the devil's in the details with this question, right? And we've already sort of nibbled around that. Like, what is a medium? What is a heavy duty truck? What is their use? Is it long haul or is it return to base? That type of thing. And of course, the solutions could be different for all of those. I think what's really important, though, is succinctly landing on what are we trying to accomplish with a sales mandate, though, with the ZEV mandate. And one of the things that Transition Accelerator really feels strongly in is that we're in a new paradigm now. For 30 years, since the UNFCCC was signed in 1992, we were trying to reduce emissions. Emissions reduction was the objective. And think of all the agreements that we went through, Kyoto and Copenhagen and so on. Now the whole world, all of us, governments, private sector, individuals, we've sort of did it too long, and now we've lost that window. Now we have to get to net zero. We know this. This is the Paris Agreement in 2015. So the objective now is zero inside of a net zero definition. It's not to reduce emissions. Reducing emissions is yesterday's game. Today's game is to get to zero. And we don't know of any credible modeling that shows that simply reducing emissions in medium and heavy duty vehicles can actually get you a society where you get to zero. So that's why governments around the world are actually bringing in ZEV mandates, zero emission vehicles mandates. So one of the real challenges with these other options like natural gas or bio is they seem to be probably applicable in the shorter term for a subset of the solution. So how much public support should go into developing solutions that are temporary and fix part of the problem? Private sector can do whatever the heck it wants, but our argument is that the public support, governments should invest in reg policy and financially into permanent solutions that will fix the real problem. And for us, that comes down to a very, very limited number of options that leads you to hydrogen and away from some of the bio options. And this is likely to be contentious, but I'll leave you sort of how we frame this concept up in two ways to think about it. One is dead-end pathways. So a dead-end pathway, we think, is an investment in a technology or technology platform that is seductive. It seems like a good idea. It will reduce emissions, but it'll have to be redone at greater cost and lost time before mid-century if we actually want to get to net zero. So the concept of a dead-end pathway we think is really, really important. And then we actually think there's more certainty than uncertainty. If you buy into this notion that we're trying to eliminate emissions, not reduce them, and that is what the Globe has said they want to do, you can evaluate all the options based on this notion of, is it a dead end or is it not? No, the world's a complicated place. We know that. And to be clear, like we're super all in on biofuels. We just think there's likely higher uses of them, for example, in aviation, where frankly, there is no other option. Biofuels is really, in our interactions, even with the airlines and the manufacturers, the OEMs, bio is the only option there. But we do have other options, likely longer term, a bit more difficult. But I think that's a really important way to frame these types of conversations about what problem we're trying to fix. And for us, governments should invest in permanent solutions, not in dead ends.
Thank you. Okay, Bruce, I'm happy you were finally able to join us. Thanks so much for coming on board. So I want to wondering if we could get your thoughts on two things. First of all, just have a brief comment on what we call our key question about the zero emission sales mandate. To what extent is it feasible, available for long haul trucks? And more specifically, I'm hoping that you can speak to Dan's point here about the dead end pathways, about where strategic investment should be made. I'm sure you have lots of thoughts about this.
Sure, lots of thoughts. I just had an object lesson today, and what can go wrong when the technology doesn't hook up. So I tried to get Zoom to work for me, and I've spent maybe 20 or 30 minutes trying to finally get it to update and finally connect to this webinar, which I think is part of I think it's a good lesson when you think about what this challenge is. So first of all, I think the idea of a zero emission mandate is foolish. I think the idea of describing something as a dead end pathway is not helpful. But I respect that there are people who have views that are very much fixated on particular outcomes they'd like to see. Having said that, we're advancing technology that's in the market that's working, and it is actually at this point the only place where actual emissions reductions have occurred. That said, it's a long way from a 5 or a 10 or a 20 or 30% reduction to a 0% reduction, which is zero emissions. So that's a really, really challenging hill to go up. And if you start to use things like renewable natural gas, you can get there. If you start to use things like biofuels, you can get there. And at some point, other technologies may be available, and they may be available in 10 years, they may be available in 15 years, or they might be available in 30 years. That'll do it, that'll get you where you need to go. And that's okay. There's room for everybody in the space. Should governments be spending money on technologies that they don't believe in? No, they shouldn't. That's a political decision. But that's a decision that can come with consequences if you pick the wrong ones. And I think that's what's dangerous about a zero emission mandate at this point. We might want to see if the light duty mandates actually work, if we actually are able to get to the numbers, and if we're actually able to supply clean electricity to do the job. There's lots of good outcomes that can occur, of course, along the way, but we need to be careful that we're looking at technologies that actually work, because as I just experienced for probably 20 or 30 minutes, the technology didn't work, and I didn't get to come here and deliver the message. So I probably crammed a ton of stuff more than I should have into one spot, but there it is. But everybody's entitled to a different view. Everybody's entitled to talk about it and argue about it. But at the end of the day, we still need to transport stuff, and we still need to have our economy work. And that's a careful balancing line that we can talk about. But we'll get different feedback from the economy, different sectors of the economy as we go. If we're not careful, we find ourselves on the wrong side of things. And those are big societal questions. We're really only talking about medium and heavy duty trucking fleets. We're only really talking about Class 8, and it's a small 250,000 vehicles out of about 1 million medium heavy duty vehicles registered in Canada. So if in this segment it is actually as difficult as maybe it will be in aviation, we may be looking at a number of different technologies working simultaneously before we finally get to where we need to be. And that's really brass tacks why I think sales mandate is probably a dangerous way to go. Doesn't mean I don't think that we need to reduce emissions significantly. And it doesn't make me think that zero is not an attainable objective. It's just going to be a very difficult one to get to.
Thank you. Wondering if Johanne and Nick, you could speak to this element that's at play here about, and we've also had a question from the audience about we need to start with what's available now. We need to, we heard from Bruce this argument that renewable natural gas is what's working now, can reduce emissions now, and that's what's on the market, so to speak. Nick, if you could start us off.
Yeah, sure. I agree that there can be some benefits for using those that are immediately available now. And I think Joanne earlier raised a very good point that we shouldn't look at long-haul freight trucking transport in isolation. It's part of a much bigger network of rail and marine-based transportation. So if these fuels don't ultimately become the long-term solution, the attention that we're giving to them now is still beneficial to the overall freight sector, I think, because, for example, the biofuels and that, it could have applications with vessels, like marine vessels operating in the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence as well. So I think that just writing it off because saying it doesn't work for long-haul trucking over the long term, it could work in the medium and short term and then benefit other modes that are even more complicated to decarbonize in the long term. Another thing too I wanted to add, and Joanne had raised this, and it was a really good point, is I think we have to give a lot of consideration to what the United States is doing and not necessarily make these decisions in isolation. There's an example of Canada and US, I think it was last year, they announced this alternative fuel corridor for EV charging between Michigan and Quebec City, where they're looking to establish DC fast chargers every 80 kilometers or so along that corridor. And I think for long haul trucking, there's so much cross-border traffic with the US that we ultimately need to make sure that the infrastructure that's put in place on one side of the border matches up with what's going to be on the other side. So we have more efficient solutions for those types of trucks that are going to operate on these crucial routes of commerce. The other thing too, on the vehicle supply side, the US is a much, much larger market than Canada in terms of heavy duty trucks. Of course, there's some difference in regulations between vehicle weights and that between the two countries. But I think seeing the direction that the OEMs are going in the US is going to have a large influence on what happens in Canada as well.
Okay, thank you. Johanne?
Well, first, I will agree with my colleague Nick because we both worked on the same research project. But I think that, I mean, it's very natural for federal government and people in the industry to really focus on the end technology and fuel. But I mean, if that's going to be our approach, it will just not work because we can't have the status quo with the new types of energy because the energy return on energy invested is completely different for hydrogen or biofuels compared to regular fossil fuels. And then we also have to look at it from, if the objective is to reach climate goals, then we have to not just look at the end combustion, but also at the life cycle approach. And so that's when you start looking at that sort of more approaches like just natural gas alone is not that great for decarbonizing long haul. Then if you add CCS, you might get some better performance, but there's still so much issues as the scientific peer-reviewed research come out on terms of the impact of methanes throughout the value chain. So, but the point is just that what we need to understand is the system. So like Nick was explaining, is for different segment of trucks, we need to have better data. There is so limited data. If anything, the federal government's going to do with the ZEV mandate, it has to push itself to have better data so we can understand the origin and destination of volumes of traffic of different class trucks that we have, because this is going to allow us to have much more targeted approach, much more efficient, optimized approach to look at the right energy for the right place. And so that's why when we did our report, we really focused on the corridor. And the next step, and we went to not only just do a study of the potential, but we also brought in over 60 experts to be able to tell us whether or not the data we were going to be using for our modeling was going to work, because it's going to be constantly changing as the markets and the data and the technologies improve. So what we need is actually to have an approach that's going to be much more transparent, much more connected to actual flows of origin destination of goods. And this is where you can see if there's optimizations also to do with intermodal shifts, where you can maximize the cost and make it more efficient to use less of these extra costly fuels in the transport sector. And I mean, everyone, if you're not aware, it can take up to 2 to 14 times more electricity to produce green hydrogen that you would be using in different end uses, because hydrogen is traditionally used as a more of a product to produce fertilizer or in the refineries. So just using it in transportation is a whole new usage that has not been explored. So you can't expect that we can transform things instantaneously. What we need is more to have a pilot approach on these very specific corridors where we would compare different technologies to have real data that we can share amongst the different users, so we have an understanding and can advance together and make sure that the public money is going to be used the most efficiently possible. But right now it's kind of, we're all operating in black box, and we hope that we have the best voice in order to make our technology or fuel sound better than somebody else.
Thank you. It's great perspective. Bruce, you wanted to jump in here?
Yeah, I think, you know, you really cannot underscore the importance of data gathering. I think Johanne made a really great point about how critical data is. First of all, the fleets themselves need to engage in that kind of data and analysis of how they're using their vehicles, and that's the only way they're going to be able to deploy these new technologies, because it's going to require so much changing of how commercial fleets actually do their business, and they're investing in new technologies regardless of what they are. The data becomes so important, and the other thing is understanding. Governments need to understand, and Johanne's absolutely right, need to better understand where the right kinds of investments can be so critical to changing things. I think that we've been fairly fortunate in where natural gas vehicles have been deployed and where we want to see renewable natural gas vehicles deployed, that we have a really good understanding of where and how that's going to work. When I look at what needs to be done, for instance, for hydrogen or battery recharging infrastructure, those are significant hills to climb in terms of investments and understanding where the fleets are going to be active and using those resources. And they're going to be new resources, and they're going to potentially be in different places than where the diesel resources are. It's really, really a big challenge if you don't have data and you don't understand what's occurring sort of at a meta level, but also what each company is doing. And that's the really big challenge. And the difference here is, when you look at the advanced biofuels and you look at those kinds of drop-in fuels, you don't need to do as much of that, right? If you can make those technologies work, it's a lot easier for those companies to use it and to access it. But if the push and if the need is to go further than that, or if there are less expensive options or any of these other new technologies want to get into the marketplace, you're really going to need to understand how different smaller segments will work and be effective. And in long haul trucking, medium and long haul trucking is very challenging because the fleets go to so many different places, and the demands are so unique sometimes to a fleet or even a particular customer of that fleet. And that makes it very difficult for some of these technologies to bite and to kind of come into the market. We certainly experienced that with natural gas technology, and we fully expect that to continue, and we fully expect that to continue with RNG technologies. It's a really, really big challenge. And I would venture to say there isn't enough government money to solve all of these problems, even if they decided those were the only problems they wanted to solve. But absolutely, we'll be dead in the water if we don't get back to understanding the data and where those flows are. And in Canada, there is so much traffic through the Great Lakes region, which is to say Quebec, Ontario, and a whole bunch of adjoining jurisdictions, that I think we still don't fully understand where those are going and where those vehicles are going, what the connections are, and how we can change that in terms of at least the technology that's being used, and therefore the emissions that are associated with that. And that's one of the trade corridors in Canada that I'm just sort of zooming in on. There are others that are not as big, but they're still important. It's a big, complex picture to solve.
Thank you. Okay, we will turn to Dan, and then I believe Nick, wondering if we could address a little bit the issue of what about the vehicles that are available now and how we can best deal with that particular situation as well. Dan?
That issue of cost is a really important one, but it actually has a lot of nuance to it. So, we hear an awful lot about the cost of transition, for sure. Every single analysis that we know about at the Accelerator, we know about 15 from around the world, shows that the cost of inaction, the cost of not doing anything, is more expensive, like out of taxpayers' pocket, more expensive than the cost of acting. And because the issue is we're talking about permanent change to the planet that's going to make this a very, very different place in the future. The most recent estimates from the United Nations, and by the way, the United Nations have been basically right on everything they've been saying for 30 years. The scientists, what they're predicting is 1.2 billion people displaced by 2050. So if we think we've got a housing crisis now, think about 1.2 billion people knocking at doors, countries like Canada are trying to get in because they can't live where they are because there's no water or they can't grow food. So the costing is really important. And that's the big context there, is that the cost of inaction is actually more out of the taxpayers than the cost of action. I think, and there's no question, there's huge challenges with permanent solutions, not temporary ones, like natural gas, because that cannot be a permanent part of the solution. But boy, when you set the right signals into the marketplace, like you did for passenger vehicles or any other of the large regulations the government's come out with in terms of environmental protection, people get into the solution space. And just look what's happening. I mean, literally 2 weeks ago, a hydrogen truck took off from the Edmonton Regional Hydrogen Hub, went to Calgary and back on a single tank, and had 40% fuel left. Look, that's one data point. It's tiny compared to the actual challenge here. But it's happening. We're putting 2 trucks on the road with 3 fueling stations between Edmonton and Calgary, starting in April. And I'll just flag, we've been consulting very, very widely with the private sector along the full value chain, production, distribution, and storage of hydrogen. And we're coming out with a minimum viable corridor model in about a month. And this, I think, really takes it out of this pilot project type of approach that is frankly dated and won't work. It's great to put a truck on the road, but the question is, how many fueling stations, size of fueling stations that will make them economic? And because of that, what types of trucks, and we're talking hydrogen here, need to run at what distances and what frequencies and what sizes in order to make the economics work. And we were extremely surprised by the results. The price tag is much, much lower than we think about it when we actually don't do it using sort of a critical analysis model. But we're happy to connect in with Pembina and be part of that rollout of that minimum viable corridor model. We think I think it's going to be really interesting.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Nick, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this specific idea about, we need to work with what's available today, consider the entire ecosystem and the field of trucking and the trucks available and the support and the maintenance and all of that when we talk about how we want to reach our climate goals.
I could weigh in just on that, Hanju. I think we've been talking about some of the practicalities. I don't think anybody would have any less passion than Dan has for, we've got an emergency, we need to fix it. Unfortunately, having an emergency doesn't make technology work if it doesn't work. The technology has a mind of its own, as Bruce has reminded us. And I, by the way, I would never have guessed, even 5 years ago, that today California would have 60% of its distillate fuel in a renewable content. So we have to go back and be humble about this. When the low carbon fuel standard in California was being developed, the Air Resources Board, which arguably is the most well-researched environmental regulatory agency in the world, got it completely wrong. They were convinced that the LCFS would be carried by cellulosic ethanol and electrification. And then it didn't happen. The cellulosics are still a tiny slice of the wedge, and electrification is just now starting to generate substantial credits. So I think we've got to be really careful about being assertive that a certain technology is going to show up. I do want to go back to the comment about the North American energy system. Trade flows in Canada are massively reliant on the trucking sector, and many of those are north-south. Everybody on this call follows the state dysfunctional at too many times of the U.S. lurch toward decarbonization. And I think the fleet operators that I engage with are loath to invest in a technology that may literally strand them at the border when they can't go across and access the same kind of fuels there. So there are things that are completely beyond the control of the Canadian government, subnational, national, when it comes to the Americans. And I think we need to be really cautious about that we're not, you want to talk about a dead-end pathway, that's a dead-end path, is to invest in a technology that the nation next door that's your largest trading partner is not going down the road on. And I would say, unfortunately, the odds are increasingly in that direction. That's kind of one kind of real world perspective.
Thank you. Nick, if you wanted to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a little bit of a different perspective, but I think regardless of what technologies are emerging as kind of better solutions out there for emissions. I think on the cost side of things, we should look at the total life cycle cost for the vehicle, and if there is an incremental capital cost for purchasing that vehicle, then I think government and policies can take aim at trying to reduce that gap, provided that over the life cycle of the vehicle that you get savings recouped. I think a lot of the modeling that's out there shows, with alternative fuels or electric trucks that you're able to save on fuel costs and maintenance costs over the life cycle of the vehicle, but still there's that hurdle of upfront capital investment. And particularly for a lot of the small and mid-sized trucking enterprises, owner-operator type models, where they own their own truck and drive on behalf of another company, like that incremental capital cost is going to be a barrier to get the ball rolling for some of these smaller groups to make the switch.
Thank you. So I do have a question from the audience about hydrogen, and how we derive it. But I'm wondering, I would like to end off this webinar by asking a broader question about fuel availability, because I think we've heard quite a bit about vehicle availability, vehicle needs and technology that's available today versus technology that may be harder to develop. But my understanding, and happy to be corrected, is that in terms of renewable synthetics, even renewable natural gas, hydrogen for sure, the sustainable production of those fuels is still under development, and our ability to scale that production in a cost-effective way is still not fully proven. So in that particular context, how do we think about how fleet operators should approach the fuels they can access and the best way to decarbonize for them?
I can maybe try to. I think, for me, it's not transition is not going to be easy, especially in this sector, which is so neuralgic for our economy. The thing we need to understand is that anything that you need to scale up to the extent that we're going to do that doesn't exist today is going to be a huge challenge. And then when we talk about, we'd like to have hydrogen to be the one that's going to solve everything. But in the case of, for instance, of Quebec, we exclude blue hydrogen, any hydrogen which is not green hydrogen. So if there's going to be fuel being used in transportation, in the context of Quebec, it's only going to be green hydrogen. But even that's going to be a challenge, because in Quebec, for instance, even with our huge hydro production, we are already living the crunch of having to find extra production of electricity just to electrify the existing use in industry, in transportation, for personal usage, and in the buildings to heat. So I think that we need to have an approach which is going to be looking for first of all, as a priority, how do you optimize any energy, whether it is diesel, regular diesel, natural gas, whatever. If you can just use less, it's already a better thing than just randomly switching to anything. Just optimizing what we are already using is already going to be good. And so hybrid systems are increasingly being considered. For instance, we never talk about catenary trucks, but once you've identified your origin destinations and high volume long distance corridors, then the possibility, for instance, of having catenary technologies, which is already being used in Sweden, Germany, and in UK, they're going to be having much larger possibilities of that. Then you can use other options like renewable natural gas or biofuels as an extender once you get out of the corridor to do your last mile delivery. In that sense, you will need less of it, but you will use the energies more efficiently and be able to have less cost, because the cost is going to be a problem and the supply is going to be a problem. So there's also for electric trucks, for instance, with batteries in itself, it's a huge issue. There is a lot of demand load, and there's colleagues at University of Windsor which are looking at that, but they're looking at hydrogen as an extender, which you could be using with electric battery for long haul trucks. So I think we need to move a little bit beyond and see how we use energy, because they're going to be just as important as the energy itself.
Thank you. Okay, Bruce?
Yeah, energy availability, fuel availability, that's going to be the whole ball game, particularly in this market segment. And when I say this, I don't just mean Class 8, I just mean commercial transportation writ large. Nobody's got it figured out. There would not be enough electricity in the right places if the vehicles were available, in the next 10 or 15 years. That would be a problem if they were all electric vehicles. There's going to be serious challenges scaling up hydrogen. There's going to be serious debates about which hydrogen is right or wrong, and we're going to have difficulty finding renewable natural gas and really effective advanced biofuels are going to take a while to get in the marketplace as well. And I think the bottom line is we got to be careful not to train our guns on each other about the technology. So ours is better, yours is no good, and really think in terms of what can we do to advance some incremental changes now, some changes that move the market down the road to thinking about this and to developing these energy supplies. It is much more difficult in the real world than people fully appreciate to actually get those fleets supplied the way they need to be supplied to be effective. And
Okay.
and that's a challenge we all need to focus on.
Thank you. Okay, can I get sorry about this, but could you get final thoughts from Ian? And then Dan, I wonder if you could speak very briefly, final thoughts, but also on this specific point that was made about the Quebec, saying we only want, basically we only going to consider hydrogen from electrolysis. And unfortunately, I think that's all we'll have time to address today. But yeah, please.
I'll be really short, Kanju. I just to back up what Bruce is saying, I go back to California. Had California determined in 2010 to mandate cellulosics and mandate EVs, we would have been a decade behind. So California took an approach that said, we want a technology neutral, let the market bring the best solutions. By the way, I'm not going to say let the market decide. Markets are massively imperfect. So I don't trust the market. But if you do send a signal, and this is my concern, aligned with Bruce's, if you signal that you don't want some pathways, you send a signal that those get de-invested in, and you may think you're being clever, but a decade down the road when the technology you put your bets on hasn't showed up, you're kind of hooped. So I think we really want to, again, use a performance basis. If the performance rule is you got to be able to put a fuel on the table that is near neutral or neutral, that's the goal. Let that technology have its day.
Thank you. Finally, Dan?
Look, I'm going to agree with that. I mean, that's why we have a zero emission vehicle mandate, right? I mean, the governments are not picking winners and losers like they did in California with cellulosic. That was basically a farm lobby that did that, right? So, but again, I think focusing on, improvements are not good enough. Public dollars should be going into stepwise pathways that can lead to permanent solutions that are scalable. That's and I think if you don't take that approach, what you're going to be getting is the private sector wasting money in things that are not going to solve our problem. That's the whole point of a dead-end pathway that's very real and bought into, for example, by the Cummins Diesels of the world and so on and so forth. So the question was around, has anyone done any economics around when green hydrogen can become more basically economical or compete with blue? That's the question that went into the chat. Our position is we don't really care about color, and I think that's time to move past that. It's about carbon intensity and cost. And in this pathways paradigm, what we feel very strongly about is hydrogen actually will be emerge as a winner because it is basically one of the only things, or basically, or arguably about the only thing that can actually solve the problem, which is be net zero for long haul heavy freight. And we actually think that this pathways paradigm is very useful because what it does is allows you to take very imperfect steps as long as you can get to a permanent solution. So we think we need to not focus on carbon intensity right now. We need to focus on building a hydrogen distribution system and let the market take care of hydrogen over the long term. That our analysis show that some hydrogen made by upgrading natural gas, some people will call it blue, can actually have lower carbon intensity depending on what your grid is like. So us saying like it's not an option simply to not use hydrogen simply because it comes from a fossil fuel. We think that's leaving a very important option off the table and don't support that. We're really about like what's the end goal is to get a hydrogen distribution system in place, almost certainly easier to pay for now with some type of higher carbon hydrogen, and let the market take care of the intensity over the long term. That's our very strong. We understand that there's lots of political overlays in this and east-west and so on, but we don't think that that's an approach that is likely to lead us to success earlier, leaving that option of making hydrogen and fossil fuels off the table.
Thank you. Okay.
I would just like to say that we did study, and for us, it's not a question of whether hydrogen is good or bad. It's just not efficient for every use. And now there's already 2% of global emissions, which is caused by hydrogen for other use, such as fertilizer, refining, or other petrochemical uses. And those uses have to be decarbonized because it's 900 million tons of CO2 globally. So what we want to focus on is to make sure that our hydrogen is decarbonized, and we're going to use it hopefully in industries such as acier, which is steel. There's key industries that cannot have other options to decarbonize, or methanol. Methanol in the maritime industry has a good option for that, but it can't go around. It's not true it's going to be large scale, and I think we need to come down to that. Even in the IPCC have found that it was 3% of global mix by 2050 that would be hydrogen. So we have to use it preciously, and there will be some transportation that might be using it, but I don't think it's going to be large scale. And so we have to be a little bit realistic and make sure, like what Ian or Bruce, that there's other options for hybrids or for the best use of energy at the right place.
Yeah, I think if you take a look at some of the latest ways of doing reforming, boy, that carbon intensity goes way down, and that changes completely. And none of that was included in the IEA. So we actually think that they need to redo their numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. On that note,
thanks
we
all.
have to end this webinar. I'd like to thank everyone, our panelists and the audience, for their participation. We are running 2 more webinars on the 22nd of February and 28th of February on regional haul as well as on medium duty trucks. We welcome you to attend and to participate. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need the registration links. Once again, I want to thank everyone for a great discussion and really got into it, especially towards the end. Appreciate everyone's comments and time here. Thank you and have a good day.